The villagers called her the Quiet One. Lian Shui lived in a home of cracked stone and wild herbs, nestled beneath the crooked trees at the edge of the mountain road. Her roof leaked when it rained. Her garden bloomed unevenly. Her shawl was mended, more times than it should have been, but she never complained. She simply rose each day with the mist, ground herbs into powder, and brewed teas that made old men sleep easier. She lived alone. No family, no friends, only silence and her soft steps across wooden floors. But every evening, without fail, she left a bowl of food outside her garden gate. Not because someone asked, but because someone always took it. She never saw who, not truly, a rustle in the underbrush, a shadow slipping past the moonlight, a faint scrape of ceramic when the bowl was returned, never empty, never full, just touched. At first, she thought it was a stray dog, then a boy from the village. But one night, during the first snow of winter, she lit a lantern and waited by the door. Hours passed. The wind howled through the trees like old voices. Then, footsteps, heavy, slow. She peeked through the wooden slats. A man stood by the gate, tall, wrapped in a tattered grey cloak. His hair fell loose over his face. His hands were bare and red from cold. He did not look up. He only knelt before the bowl and lifted it with care, like it was something sacred. He drank the broth, ate 2 bites of rice, then placed the bowl down and turned to go. She opened the door without thinking. "You don't have to leave so quickly." Her voice was soft, barely above the wind. He froze. Then, slowly, he turned. His head, just enough to reveal part of his face, gaunt, shadowed by stubble, with a long scar that ran from cheekbone to chin. He said nothing. Lian Shui stepped into the snow, holding a small cloth bundle. "I made these for your hands," she said, offering 2 thin gloves sewn from scraps. Still, he didn't speak, but he took them. Their eyes met, for a breath. Then he bowed his head once and disappeared into the trees. She stood in the cold long after he was gone, the steam of the broth still rising faintly behind her. The next morning, the gloves were gone, and in their place the bowl had been, carefully washed and turned upside down to dry. She smiled, and left another bowl that night. In the weeks that followed, the routine became ritual. Every evening, before dusk, she filled a bowl with rice, vegetables, and warm broth. Some days she left sweet buns, other days dried plums or spiced tea, and always, the bowl came back clean. She began leaving notes under the cloth napkin, simple things. "It will snow tomorrow. Be careful near the stream. There's ginger in the soup today. Good for the cough." He never replied, but once he left behind a single white jasmine flower. It had no stem, just the bloom, perfectly placed on the wooden rail. She dried it and pressed it into her herbal book without a word. The village noticed her more now. They didn't ask, but they whispered, "She's feeding spirits." An old woman muttered. "No, no," said another. "It's a man, a dangerous one. You can tell by her eyes. They shine strange lately." Lian Shui ignored them. She kept brewing, kept planting, kept waiting. And every night, just before the last light slipped from the sky, she walked to the gate and placed her offering, down like a prayer. One afternoon, while washing herbs by the stream, she found a thread of cloth caught on a branch, thick and dark gray, frayed at one edge. She kept it. She didn't know why. Maybe because it smelled faintly of cedar smoke and metal. Maybe because she wanted to feel closer to something she didn't understand. But mostly because it felt like proof. He was real, not a ghost, not a fever dream. Real, and choosing to return to her every day, without words, without promises, just hunger and presence, and maybe something more. That night she waited longer than usual. The moon rose high, the wind grew colder. Still, no footsteps, no movement. She began to worry. Then, at the edge of her vision, a flicker. He was there, but something was different. He leaned heavier on the gatepost. His breath came in short clouds, one hand pressed tightly against his ribs. She ran. The bowl clattered to the ground. When she reached him, he tried to step back but stumbled. "I'm fine," he muttered, his first words. His voice was low, rough, and unused. "You're not," she said, slipping under his arm. "Come inside." "I can't." "You already did," she said quietly. "Every night you returned." That was permission enough. He didn't answer, but he didn't stop her. Inside, by the fire, she peeled back his cloak and saw the bruises. Dark, swollen, fresh. A rib broken, a shoulder cut, dirt caked into his skin. She didn't ask. Who did it? She only brought warm water and herbs, wrapped his side with silk bandages, steeped tea with honey and root, wiped his forehead with quiet hands. He sat in silence. Only once did he meet her eyes and say, "You shouldn't help me." She replied, "I already did." And that was the beginning of truth, of tenderness, of something no one else could see but both of them could feel. The fire cracked softly. Outside, the wind had calmed, but the snow continued to fall, in slow, drifting silence. Inside, Lian Xue moved with quiet precision. She stirred the tea one last time, added a sprig of dried plum blossom, and set the cup beside him. The man hadn't spoken again. He sat on the woven mat, his cloak discarded, one arm bound tightly to his side where the bruises were worst. His eyes, dark, still and unreadable, followed her every movement, but not with fear, not even suspicion, with something closer to disbelief, as if he couldn't decide if she was real, or just another hallucination brought on by cold, hunger, and loss. She didn't press him. She knew the look well. Years ago, she'd worn it herself after her parents vanished in the fire that devoured their home. When the world tilts and nothing feels safe, silence is the last fortress. So she didn't ask. And questions. She just handed him the tea. He accepted it with both hands, held it for a long moment before drinking, then softly, "This is jasmine." She nodded. "You left a flower," she said. "I thought you might like the taste." A flicker of something passed over his face, not quite a smile, but not indifference either. He took another sip. The steam curled between them. Then, "You should let me go." She didn't flinch. "You're not ready. I've survived worse." "Maybe," she said gently, "but not alone." That silenced him again. He stayed that night, not by choice, but because his legs wouldn't hold him. She made him a bed near the fire, just blankets, a thin pillow, a low wooden screen between them. He didn't ask for more. She didn't offer. At dawn, she found him gone. The blanket was folded neatly, the teacup rinsed and left upside down. A small token rested beside it, a single wooden bead carved with the symbol for quiet. She picked it up and closed her hand around it. Then she did what she had done every day for over a year. She filled a bowl with warm rice, sweet radish, and ginger broth, and placed it by the gate. That evening he returned. She didn't greet him. He didn't speak, but he ate everything. And this time, when he finished, he lingered near the tree, by the garden, just far enough to pretend he wasn't waiting. She lit the lantern early that night and left the door slightly open. He didn't enter, but she saw his shadow pause. It was enough. For 3 days the rhythm continued. He came just before dark, silent and worn. She served him quietly, treated his injuries, left him a cushion near the fire. They didn't speak of names or pasts, only small things. The smell of tea leaves, the sound of sparrows returning to the roof, the warmth of fire through cold silk. It was not friendship, not yet, but it was something shared. Oh, the fourth night, he spoke again. I had a name, he said, voice low. She looked up from her herbs. I still do, but no one speaks it anymore. She didn't ask him to tell her. Instead, she said, then I'll call you whatever you want to be. He looked at her for a long moment, then said, Ren. She repeated it in her mind. Ren, not a grand name, not a court name, a name of earth, not throne, simple, grounded. I'm Lian Shui, she replied softly. He nodded once. I know. Her brows lifted. He didn't explain. She didn't press. Later that night she handed him a thin blanket and turned to prepare her sleeping mat. But his voice stopped her. You're not afraid? She turned. Of what? Of me. She studied him. His hands were scarred, his body lean from hardship, but his eyes, they weren't cold, just weary. No, she said. I think you've already been feared enough. He looked away. She let the silence settle between them, then whispered, and maybe I've already been invisible enough. Ren said nothing, but he didn't look away from her again. The next morning, he didn't leave. He fetched water from the well, chopped wood slowly, with his injured shoulder still wrapped. When she offered to help, he shook his head. You've done enough, she frowned. It's not a debt. But he only replied, let me repay it in my way. That afternoon, she found a pile of kindling stacked neatly by the kitchen, and beside it, a wooden spoon, freshly carved, the handle etched with plum blossoms. She traced her fingers along the petals, then smiled. That evening, as they sat in silence sipping broth, she asked, why did they exile you? He didn't answer at first. Then, quietly, because I protected someone I wasn't supposed to. She waited. I was loyal, he continued. But loyalty means nothing when it threatens power. She set her cup down. And now, they think I'm dead. She looked at him fully now. And do you want to stay that way? He met her gaze. I don't know. She nodded once and didn't say another word. But that night, after the fire went out and the house fell quiet, he didn't sleep near the door. He moved his mat a little closer to hers, not touching, not asking, just nearer, and she didn't move away. Spring arrived without announcement. It crept in quietly, softening the edges of winter one thaw at a time. The snow vanished from the garden path. Buds formed on the crooked trees behind Lian Xue's house. The wind changed, no longer sharp, but gentle, like a sigh finally released. And Ren stayed. He didn't say the words. He didn't call it staying. But each morning she found him there, sweeping the threshold, warming the tea, mending the broken hinge on her cupboard door, with thread and calm hands. Each task was quiet, but each was a choice. He no longer slept near her door. He moved his mat to the inner wall beside hers, with only the space of a breath between them. And though neither spoke of it, she no longer rolled her blanket all the way out. She left space, not invitation, not presumption, just possibility. And that was enough. One afternoon, as Lian Xue returned from the village with a basket of dried roots, she heard voices behind her. Not many, just two, men, strangers. She kept walking, faster now, until her gate came into view. But before she could reach the latch, one of them called out, "Herbs or poisons, girl?" She didn't turn, didn't answer. They followed. She was almost to the door when the taller one caught her wrist. "I asked you something." The grip wasn't cruel, but it was firm, familiar, the kind that reminded her what it meant to have no one. She inhaled, prepared to speak, but the door opened before she could. Ren stood there, no cloak, no mask, just a loose tunic and the kind of stillness that draws fear without raising a single hand. He said nothing, only stepped forward between her and the man. The stranger looked at him, scoffed, and released her wrist. "No harm meant," he muttered. "Didn't know she had company." Ren didn't respond. He only waited. The two men left, quickly. Lian Xue stood frozen by the gate, one hand still trembling over her basket. Ren turned to her, and for the first time she saw something different in his eyes. Not silence, not retreat, but rage. Not loud, not wild, just cold and buried, the kind that had nowhere to go. That night, after the lanterns were out and the village was asleep, she found him by the well, sharpening a broken blade. He didn't look at her. She didn't ask what he was doing. Instead, she said, "You've carried that anger for a long time." He paused. "It's the only part of me they couldn't take." She stepped closer. "I'm not asking you to let it go," she said, "only not to carry it alone." He finally looked at her. His voice came low, controlled. "You want to know what I did?" She didn't answer because she did, and he knew it. "I served a minister once," he said. "Loyal, dutiful. I believed in the emperor, the court, the scrolls they read out loud every morning." His mouth twisted slightly. "There was a girl, a servant, a child, really. She overheard something she shouldn't have, not because she was spying, but because she was sweeping the floor." He looked away toward the garden. They were planning something, a betrayal, quiet, clean, names spoken in shadows. "I told her to leave the palace, disappear. And then," she whispered, "she didn't make it out. They said I had put her up to it, that I was plotting against the empire. The minister I served said nothing." He drew in a breath. "They lashed me, took my title, burned the seal with my name." A long silence followed. "I didn't run because I feared death," he added. "I ran because I wanted to live long enough to remember her." Lian Xue reached out. Her fingers brushed the scar beneath his collar, the one that never quite faded. She didn't ask more, didn't offer pity, only stillness, and the quiet kind of touch that says, "I see you, I still see you." After that night, something shifted. They moved around each other less like strangers, more like shadows dancing near the same light. He began carving again, not weapons this time, but shapes. A rabbit for the garden wall, a phoenix feather etched into the side of her teacup. Little things, hidden, but she noticed them all. And one morning, just before sunrise, she found a wooden pin on her mat, small, simple, shaped like a plum blossom in bloom. She held it in her hands for a long time, then tied up her hair and placed it at the center, not decoration, but something closer to a vow. She didn't tell him she wore it. But that evening, when he saw her at the fire, he paused, and for the first time, smiled. Not fully, not confidently, but softly, as if the weight on his shoulders had become just a little lighter, because someone was carrying part of it now. They never said the words. Not love, not stay, not even belong. But spring turned to summer, and Ren was still there. Each morning, Lian Xue would rise before the sun, sweep the garden path, and boil water for tea. And when the steam curled from the clay kettle, he would step through the back door with sleeves rolled and hair loosely tied, as if he had always belonged in that rhythm. The quiet, the dawn, the warmth of a life rebuilt from silence. They moved like two branches growing toward the same sun, never forced, never declared, only closer with time. He repaired the fence with old wood and calloused hands. She showed him how to steep wild roots for sleep, and how to cut ginger thin enough to melt on the tongue. He found a stone near the stream, shaped like a bird in flight, and placed it beside her door. She hung dried lavender above his bed just to help him rest. They never called it home, but it was. In the evenings, they sat side by side beneath the crooked plum tree behind the house. Ren would carve in silence while Lian Shui stitched herbs into sachets for trade. Some days they spoke about the way the clouds moved or the color of the tea leaves or how Chen, the baker's son, had gotten stuck in the temple bell again. But most days they didn't need to speak at all. Their quiet was not emptiness, it was trust. One evening she handed him a bundle of folded cloth. "I made you a robe," she said. He unwrapped it carefully. It was simple, brown and faded, blue, with small stitches near the collar where her fingers had worked through the night. He looked at her. "I'm not a husband." She didn't flinch. "I didn't sew it for a husband," she said. "I sewed it for someone who doesn't need to sleep in torn sleeves." He held the robe to his chest, fingers tightening slightly. That night, he wore it by the fire and didn't say a word. But when he handed her the tea, his hand lingered against hers a moment longer than usual. The villagers began to notice, not with questions, not yet, but with glances. A shopkeeper asked if she needed extra rice. "Now that you have another mouth to feed." The lantern maker's wife nodded toward her hairpin. "That blossom looks new." Lian Shui just smiled. They could say what they liked. She no longer felt invisible, and Ren no longer looked like a man waiting for death. One morning, a traveling merchant stopped at the edge of her garden. He was old, gray-bearded, sharp-eyed, and too polite. He bowed to her, eyes scanning the house. "Peaceful place," he said. "Yes," she answered. "Live alone." Before she could reply, Ren stepped through the doorway, sleeves rolled, holding a basket of onions. The merchant's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed. For just a heartbeat, Lian Shui felt the air shift. Ren didn't speak. He didn't need to. The merchant tipped his head again and left. Later that night, Ren said softly, "He recognized me," as she looked up from the pot. "Are you sure?" His hand went to the place where a seal should hang. She stirred the soup. "Will he speak?" Ren shrugged. "Maybe." Lian Shui set the bowl down and met his eyes. "Then let him." He didn't argue, but that night he sat closer to the fire and sharpened the blade he kept beneath the floorboards. A few days later, she returned from the village to find her door slightly open. Not broken, not forced, just ajar. Inside, nothing was missing. But a single plum blossom had been removed from the vase beside her bed and laid on the table. Deliberate. A message. She looked at Ren. "What does it mean?" He said, "That someone wanted you to know they were here." They didn't run. There was nowhere to run to. Instead, he built a second latch for the door. She gathered valerian root and dreamleaf for the night teas. They lit 2 lanterns instead of 1. And when they lay down that evening, their hands brushed beneath the blanket. This time, he didn't pull away, and she didn't hide the way her breath caught. That was how they began sleeping with their backs pressed lightly together. Not from necessity, not from fear, but from quiet promise. He never said, "I love you." She never said, "Don't leave." But each morning he rose and fetched water, and each night she brewed tea and left his cup just a little sweeter than before. And sometimes that is love, not in words, but in presence, in staying, in not running when you finally have something to lose. The letter arrived with a folded ribbon and a dried orange peel. Lian Shui found it tucked beneath her window at dawn, held in place with a stone smoothed by river water. There was no seal, no signature, just neat brushstrokes on thin paper, written by someone who had once practiced courtly calligraphy, but no longer needed to prove anything. It came from Uncle Wei, her father's cousin, the only blood left in the world who still remembered her as a child. the man who visited once a year and left with more gossip than blessings. She read the note slowly, then twice more. Ren watched from the doorway. He didn't ask, she didn't speak, but the way her fingers folded the paper, carefully, tightly, told him more than words ever could. That evening, she boiled sweet rice and served it without ceremony. Ren tasted the cinnamon and looked at her. "You're trying to soften a blow," she blinked. "Is it that obvious?" "Yes." She hesitated, then said, "Uncle Wei has arranged for me to marry." A pause, then, "I see. It's not formal," she added quickly. "Just a suggestion." He stirred his rice. "Who?" "A merchant from the southern road. He has 3 sons. He recently lost his wife." Ren's hand stilled. And Uncle believes I've waited long enough, that a quiet girl like me should be grateful for any offer." She tried to smile, but her mouth didn't quite obey. Ren didn't respond. He finished the bowl in silence, then rose, rinsed the dish, and stepped out into the night without another word. She found him hours later in the grove behind the house, sitting beneath the plum tree with a knife in his hands and wood shavings at his feet. He didn't look up when she approached. "Do you think I owe him that life?" she asked gently. "A house with strangers, sons who won't call me mother, a man who expects my silence like it's part of the dowry?" Ren's jaw tightened. "He thinks I'm wasting myself," she continued, "that I've tied my years to a man who won't even tie his name to mine." That made him look at her. His voice was raw. "And do you believe that?" She took a breath. "I don't need marriage." A pause. "But I do need to know if you see me, not as a habit, not as a kindness, as a woman who's choosing you." Ren stood. The carving dropped to the ground between them. A tiny figure, rough, unfinished, of a woman carrying a bowl. "I carved this the night I first spoke your name," he said, "and I've remade it 100 times since, because no shape I gave her ever felt enough." Lian Shui knelt and picked it up. The figure was cracked along the base. She cradled it anyway. Ren stepped closer. "I have no roof to offer you," he said. "No title, no gold. I never asked for any of that. I don't know what happens when they come for me. But if I'm allowed to stay in this life, I want it to be with you." He reached into the inner fold of his robe and pulled out a thin band of cord, knotted at the ends, with a single jade bead tied in the center. "It was my mother's. She wore it when she carried me on her back during the First War. It's all I have left of her." He held it out. "I can't give you a wedding, but I can give you this, if you'll wear it." Lian Shui's hands trembled as she took the cord. She didn't cry. She simply nodded, then turned around, lifted her hair, and waited. Ren stepped behind her and tied the knot gently, his fingers lingering at her nape. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The bond was sealed, not by ink, not by witness, but by choice. The next morning, she wore the cord under her robe close to her skin. The villagers noticed something different in her face. Not joy, not pride, stillness, like someone who had made peace with her path, even if no one else could see it. When the merchant passed through town again, she greeted him with kindness and said no, without apology, without regret. Uncle Wei didn't reply to her next letter, and she didn't send another. That evening, Ren returned from the woods with a branch of white plum blossoms. He laid them on her table without a word. She placed them in the carved vase beside their window, and that night, as rain tapped softly on the roof and the world curled into sleep around them, she reached for his hand beneath the blanket. This time, she didn't let go, and he didn't need to be asked. It rained for 3 days, not the kind of rain that came and went, playful and light. This rain settled into the bones of the village. It blurred the mountains and soaked the ground. It turned the road to the capital into a river of mud. Lian Xue didn't mind. Rain meant fewer travelers, fewer eyes, fewer chances of someone recognizing the man who shared her roof. But Ren watched the horizon more closely now. He no longer carved in the evenings. His blade sat untouched beside the tea jar. Instead, he sat with his arms folded, sleeves damp from gathering wood, shoulders tense. She noticed. She always noticed. On the fourth morning, the rain stopped. The silence afterward felt louder than the storm. That was when she knew. Before the knock, before the voice. She was brewing tea when it happened, a sound like a hand. Brushing the door, not pounding, not urgent, but deliberate. She opened it slowly. Two men stood there, not from the village. Their robes were clean despite the road. Both wore dark blue, trimmed with gold thread that caught the light. The one on the left held a scroll. The one on the right bore a mark on his belt, a jade ring with the imperial dragon's eye carved in reverse. They bowed. Lian Xue, the first one said, "We ask forgiveness for arriving unannounced." She didn't speak. Her eyes moved. Past them, scanning the road. No horses, no guards, just two men with good posture and quiet mouths. And danger hidden in both. "What do you want?" she asked. The second man bowed again and handed her the scroll. She didn't take it. Ren's voice came from behind her. "It's all right." She turned. He stood barefoot, hair tied back, sleeves rolled to his elbows. There was no fear in his voice, no hesitation, just finality. He took the scroll, unrolled it, and read it in silence, then handed it back. "I'll come," he said. Linzhou's heart dropped. She stepped forward. "Wait." But Ren's eyes were already on her, and they were different now. Not empty, but steady, like a man returning to the path he had once been forced from. "They know I'm alive," he said, "but they don't know who I've become." "Let them find out," she whispered. "But don't go alone." He hesitated. The officers said nothing. They didn't rush, didn't press, because they didn't need to. Ren looked at her for a long moment, then placed his hand gently on her shoulder. "I'll return before the plum blossoms fall." She didn't blink, didn't cry. She only nodded once and placed something in his palm, the small wooden figure he'd carved long ago. "The woman with the bowl. You carved it for me," she said. "Now take her with you." He left without armor, without escort, without promise. Just a quiet man walking toward the storm again, for the sake of ending it. She stood by the doorway long after he disappeared down the road. Only when the rain began again, light and unsure, did she return inside and begin to wait. Days passed, then a week. The silence inside the house stretched like thread between hands, pulled thin, trembling. She kept the fire going. She swept the threshold every morning. She boiled tea at dusk, even though no one came through the door to drink it. And every night she touched the cord he had tied around her neck, not for comfort, but for memory, for proof that none of this had been imagined. Then one morning, as she swept the garden path, a boy ran up from the village, out of breath. He held a folded paper in one hand, sealed with a pressed thumb instead of wax. "He said to give this only to you," the boy gasped. "Said not to let anyone else see." She opened it with trembling fingers. Just one line. They listened. She didn't know what that meant. Not exactly. But that night, she lit 2 lanterns again. She set out 2 bowls, and when the wind passed through the trees outside the window, it no longer sounded like morning. It sounded like breath. He didn't return that night, nor the next, but she didn't stop waiting, because something inside her had changed the moment she saw his handwriting again. It wasn't hope. It wasn't certainty, it was faith. And faith is the kind of silence that holds you upright, even when the world forgets you. The sun rose clear for the first time in weeks. The sky turned gold at the edges, the kind of light that made the village look softer than it was. Children played barefoot near the stream. Vendors opened baskets of herbs and dyed cloth. Chickens pecked between stones in the road. And Lian Shui stood in front of her house with jasmine in her hair, not knowing it was her wedding day. Not until the knock came. 3 hard taps on wood. She opened the door expecting a neighbor. Instead, she found Uncle Wei, dressed in formal robes and holding a folded silk sash. He looked at her like someone arriving late to a duty. "You didn't respond to the second letter," he said. "I had no answer. You didn't need." "But the date was already set." She blinked. "What date?" Wei exhaled through his nose. "Today, the merchant waits at the temple. He's made a generous offer, and you're not a child anymore. I never agreed." "No," he said, "but I did, as your only living kin." Behind him 2 other men waited, strangers. One held the bridal veil, red silk stitched with gold thread. The other carried a lacquered box with bangles and hairpins. "My name's already in the registry," Wei said. "It's done. All that's left is for you to walk." Lian Shui stood very still. The wind picked up slightly. Then quietly she said, "You have no right." "I have duty," he snapped. "And you have no husband, no protection, no future if I turn my back. Do you want to die a widow in all but name, feeding ghosts and carving scraps for a man who vanished without a word?" Her jaw tightened. "I want to choose," she whispered. Uncle Wei didn't reply. Instead, he nodded toward the men. "Dress her." They entered her house without permission. They took down the herbs from her shelf, covered the table with silk, lifted the red veil, and tried to place it over her hair. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She simply reached up and untied the cord from her neck, the jade bead worn and warm from her skin, and held it in her palm like a blade. "I am already married," she said. They hesitated. That was when the sound reached them. Hooves, distant at first, then louder, rhythmic, 13 of them. 13 horses descending the road like thunder held in formation. The men dropped their hands. Lian Shui stepped outside, and what she saw made her breath stop. 13 riders in ceremonial armor. Each bore a silk banner with the imperial seal. Not the emblem of war, but the mark of pardon. Their armor shimmered with threads of blue and crimson. Dragon motifs curled over shoulder plates and gauntlets. Helmets gleamed beneath the sun, and at their center, on the lead horse, sat a man in dark robes without armor, his hair bound with a silver clasp, his eyes steady. It was Ren. He dismounted. Before the horses even stopped, walked the final stretch on foot. No sword, no escort in front. Just him. And when he reached her, he knelt, in front of the entire village, in front of Uncle Wei, in front of the men holding her veil and bangles. He did not raise his voice. He did not beg. He simply looked up at her and said, "You gave me food when I had no name. Now I return with one, and I give it to you." Lian Shui didn't cry, but her hand closed tightly around the cord in her palm. And when she opened it again, she placed it back around her neck, not as a secret, this time, but in full view of everyone. Uncle Wei stepped forward. "This is madness," he barked. "You have no status, no house." "She has a house," Ren interrupted. His voice was quiet, but final. "She gave it to me when I had nothing, and now she will have mine." He turned back to Lian Shui. "I don't come with titles," he said. "Only a cleared name and a place in the imperial court. But I will not return if you ask me to stay." She reached out, touched the edge of his sleeve, and nodded. "I waited for you," she said. "I know," he replied. "I was never Ifar." That afternoon, the men who came to dress her left in silence. The merchant never showed. Uncle Wei vanished before dusk, and Lian Xue stood beside Ren as the villagers watched 13 imperial soldiers form a ring around the garden gate, not as guards, but as witnesses. No priest, no scrolls, no feast, only the wind, the scent of plum blossoms, and a woman who chose her heart over silence, and a man who returned in full light, not to reclaim his place, but to offer it to her.
Before you go, hit subscribe. It means the world to us, and it's how we know this story touched you. Leave a comment and we'll reply with your name as a thank you. We read every message. We remember every name. Subscribe now and be part of the next quiet story that matters.